today's live is going to be about the 4 levels and 5 dimensions of healing. And this is a framework that I've been playing with to kind of help map out some of these nebulous, mystical areas of our reality and our consciousness and try and make it a little bit more easily understood, easy to play with, so that we can all evolve faster and have richer, more fulfilling lives and businesses and relationships and whatever floats your boat. So we're going to dive really deep into that today. And this was inspired for me actually to just get on here and share it. That now was the time, because of an experience I had maybe 3 or 4 days ago now, where I had to heal a fear that I picked up, by my estimates, about 300,000 years ago. And so if that sounds a little wild, it is. And we're going to talk about how something like that could happen and how to work with it and how to use it to catapult you into more growth, into more flow. So as I was saying, I cleared a fear that came up about 300,000 years ago, that I picked up rather 300,000 years ago, and some beliefs that were entangled with that were actually creating a lot of issues for me now in my life, without me really being aware of it, because I wasn't aware that I had this thing that I picked up so long ago. So that inspired me to get together and do this live, because when you understand the 4 levels of healing and the 5 dimensions of healing, then you have context for when something like this comes up, and you can even proactively engage it. And like I've been saying, accelerate your growth and your expansion really powerfully. So before I get into the actual framework and how you can start using it, what I first want to talk about is why is healing important in general? And for some of you, this may be a duh, but I want to paint a really clear picture of why healing is so essential and important, because when you understand how it connects to everything else in your life, then you can see why putting in the time and energy to really get things dialed in here is so important. So why is healing so important? Well, healing's so important because we're actually creating our reality in real time every second of every day. And when you understand how that process works, then it starts to make more sense where healing comes in. And so there's 3 different levels that we're creating our reality on. And I'm only going to talk about 2 of them, and somewhat briefly here, because I really want to reserve most of the time to go into the framework here. So just know that if you want a deeper download on this is something that we have a free masterclass training all about on our website, flowconsciousnessinstitute.com. So if you want the full download on this little snippet that I'm going to share on creating your reality and healing and all of that, go check that out, and you can get a much more in-depth dive into that. But for the sake of this live here, we're creating our reality on 3 different levels. And the first 2 levels I'm going to talk about, which really relate to healing most strongly, are the level of personal reality and then the level of external reality. So on the level of personal reality, right, this is the first level, we're creating our experience by how we perceive the events that we're experiencing, or we perceive the things that are happening to us. Nothing's actually happening to us. We're always creating the circumstances, but nevertheless, how we perceive what's happening to us determines the emotional state that we're in. So it affects our reality by affecting our emotional state. And we're also creating our reality on a personal level by how we perceive what's happening to us, okay? So how that works is that when something happens in our lives, we perceive it, it comes into our mind, into our consciousness, and then it's filtered through our belief structures, our perception. And that tells us how to react to the thing that we're experiencing, and if we should be scared or if we should be happy or joyful or neutral or whatever. Now, everybody has different perceptions and beliefs. Even though we can be experiencing the exact same thing, we all have different perceptions or beliefs, so we all have a different experience of it. And there's a famous saying that we don't experience reality as it is, we experience reality as we are. We don't see life, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. And this is referring to the fact that we're pulling everything through this perceptual filter, and that's determining our emotional experience. And whatever our perception and our emotional experience are of something, that's our experience of the reality of it. And so if we have beliefs like I'm not good enough, or the world is a dangerous place, then that's going to cause us to interpret things in a way that creates self-doubt or creates fear, emotional reactions of fear. But on the other hand, if we believe that we can achieve or accomplish anything we put our minds to, or that the world is a safe place, right, then we're going to feel a lot more trust and happiness. We're going to have more self-confidence. We're going to have richer, fuller lives. We'll probably travel more, have a more rich experience, rich set of different experiences, right? So same circumstances, we're experiencing life, but with these two different perceptual filters, we get completely different personalized experiences of it. Okay, so this is the first level. The second level that we're creating our reality on is by positioning ourselves in space and time through our decisions and our actions, and hence everything that controls those decisions and those actions, right? So this is kind of a heady concept, but to simplify it, I created a framework called BETDAR. That's BETDAR. And BETDAR stands for beliefs, emotions, thoughts, decisions, actions, and results. Okay, and this is a map of how we're creating our reality, starting at the deepest levels with our beliefs and our emotions, and then moving through the psychological sequence of events that results in our external experience of reality, right? BETDAR, beliefs, emotions, thoughts, decisions, actions, and results. So basically, our beliefs are our deepest layer of programming, okay? Beyond beliefs, we have pure awareness, but in order to operate in this ultra complex physical reality that we live in, we need belief structures to simplify that complexity and let us know how to act so that we can thrive and we can continue to live and we can continue to survive and have what we need to really, have a meaningful life. So our beliefs are trying to sort for that at all times. So our beliefs are the most foundational layer of our internal programming, and our beliefs largely dictate our emotional state, like I just shared, right? So whatever we believe is going to dictate how we feel most of the time. And we'll talk about later on, we'll talk about some of the differences between emotional reactions to things and perceptual reactions to things. But essentially, our beliefs create our emotional state. They create the context that lets us know how to feel about something. And then our beliefs and our emotions together, those are what give rise to our thoughts. Okay, thoughts aren't random. Thoughts are something that arise based on whatever our beliefs or perceptions say about it, and based on how we're feeling at that time, our emotional state. And then our beliefs and our emotions and our thoughts all together influence the decisions we make. The decisions are an extension of that gestalt of those deep three elements: the beliefs, the emotions, and the thoughts. And then based on what we decide to do, we take action. And when we take action and make decisions over time, that results in our positioning in space and time, right? That results in our current experience of reality. If you really think about it, the reality that you're experiencing is where you are in the world, in the universe for that matter, right now. Okay, that is your current reality. And then technology might allow you to interact with people that are not around you, but you had to have met those people at some other point in time, or been introduced to them by someone else that you met. Okay, so all of that to say that your cumulative decisions and actions over the course of your life have created your experience of reality right now. They put you where you are, and where you are determines what's possible for you to experience in large part. So basically, by using that model of BETDAR, you can see that our decisions and our actions, which are ultimately, which position us in space and time and give us our experience of reality, are influenced at the deepest levels by our beliefs and our emotional state. So it's actually our beliefs and our emotional state, to a slightly lesser degree, that are creating our external reality. Now, they pass through all those other gates: our thoughts, our decisions, our actions first. So oftentimes we don't associate our reality with this deeper unconscious programming, but it's absolutely 100% a result of our beliefs and emotions, period. And this is where healing comes in, okay? Is when I'm talking about healing, what am I actually talking about? Okay, I'm not talking about healing a cut that you get on your hand. I'm not talking about healing a broken leg or something like that. When I'm talking about healing, what I mean specifically is psychospiritual healing. And by that, I mean the healing of limiting beliefs and the healing of negative emotional states. Okay, the healing of limiting beliefs and negative emotional states. And you might even take that a step further and say the healing of trauma. But what is trauma except for very powerful, deeply embedded and deeply held beliefs and emotional and negative emotional states? Okay, that's what trauma is. So healing in this context is beliefs, emotions, and to some degree trauma. And because beliefs and emotions create your reality so strongly, when you do effective healing work, okay, it's not just going to make you feel better. It's going to change all the external circumstances in your life. Okay, you're going to have greater abundance, greater wealth, greater health, better relationships. Your business is going to do better if you have one. You're going to advance further in your career. You're going to be able to discover what your purpose is, tap into your superhuman capacities, develop greater intuition. There's nothing in your life that is not controlled by your beliefs and your emotions or your perceptions and your emotions. So when you do effective healing work, it echoes out into everything else. So if you understand the 4 levels that you need to heal on, and then the 5 dimensions of depth that you need to work on, there's nothing that you can't adjust in your favor. Not only that, but it's important to your overall spiritual and personal growth and to your overall evolution. And for some of you, if you're concerned about reaching into the domains of enlightenment, this is also really essential. You can't skip this. There's no shortcuts there. So when you understand when you understand the rules of the game, you can start to move a little bit faster and not feel like life is punching you around and throwing you around. And you can start to take the reins and really consciously create your reality versus being at effect of it or being at effect of your beliefs and emotions. So that's a lot. I'm going to take a quick sip of water here. If you guys are following me and you're enjoying this, give me some love. Drop me some comments. If you have some questions as well about what I'm saying, please let me know what your thoughts are, what your questions are. I'm going to do my best to get through the framework, and then I'm going to go back and answer some of these questions here. So let me know what you're thinking and what this is stirring up in your heart and mind. I'd love to hear that. Moving on beyond these initial 2 aspects of healing, right? Working with beliefs and emotions, okay? Now we're getting into the 4 levels of healing. So what do I mean by the 4 levels of healing? So now that we're working with beliefs and emotions, we need to be working with beliefs and emotions in 4 different areas, okay? 4 different levels. And those are mentally, emotionally, energetically, and physically, okay? Mental, emotional, energetic, and physical. These are the 4 levels that we need to address beliefs and emotions on in order to really have an effective healing in the sense of a limiting belief and a limiting emotion, to actually get rid of them so that we're free of that ball and chain, and we can, replace it with something positive that's actually going to move us forward and help us self-actualize, okay? So let's talk about these 4 levels. And I started with the mind, the mental level, because this is really the level of inception. This is the level of consciousness to some degree. And this is what really moves all the other 4 levels in large part, and what seeds the other 4 levels most of the time. I'll talk about some exceptions to that, but for the most part, what's going on in our mind is what affects all these other layers most strongly, right? So the mental level is the level of the mind. It's the level of consciousness. To some degree, you could say it's the level of awareness, right? And this is where we generate our perceptions from. This is where perceptions are held. And I'm not necessarily talking about your brain when I'm talking about the mind either, okay? There's a lot of research to show that the mind's actually a non-local field of consciousness that exists independent of the physical body. And this is going to become important when we talk about some of the dimensions of healing in a little bit. But the mind exists actually as a non-local field. It interfaces with the physical body through the brain, and it interfaces with physical reality through the brain, but it's actually a non-local field. And that's important because it allows us to kind of go into other areas of reality that we often seem to be cut off from. And we'll talk about more about that in a little bit. But the level of the mind is the first level that we need to do effective healing on. And this is where we, in large part, store our belief structures, our limiting beliefs, okay? They're stored, they're encoded as quantum holograms in this field of consciousness that exists in and around our body. Now, as we said before, any belief is going to have a corresponding emotional pattern. So there's going to be an emotional level that we need to heal as well. And the emotional level starts to get a little bit more physical. The emotional level has to do with our neurological pathways that run through our body. It has to do with the different neurochemicals that are created in our system as a result of whatever belief we have or whatever perception we have. But our emotion is basically like the felt sense experience of a given belief of a given experience of reality, right? So we're clearing limiting beliefs, we're clearing negative emotions. These are the first two levels that we have to work on. The next level that I mentioned was the energetic level. And energetic level is important because when we have a belief, it's in our minds, it's going to be echoed out on all these other planes. So over time, the beliefs that we have start to create, in scientific terms, they start to create quantum holograms that accumulate in the field of non-local consciousness that surrounds our body. And so those quantum holograms will stick around even after you change your beliefs, because over time they gain more energy, they become more reinforced. They can actually stick around. So even if you've changed on the mental level, you also need to make a corresponding shift on an energetic level as well. You need to work on that level in the healing process. Otherwise, you're neglecting this key aspect. And the energetic level also encompasses your meridians, right? In Taoist philosophy, traditional Chinese medicine, we talk about meridians in the body. This is an important area where we can have energetic blocks. The dantians, the chakras, depending on what different spiritual tradition you're viewing the world through, there's energetic blocks that can get harbored there. And then there's energetic blocks that can get harbored in the fields around our body. That, all these have been measured by different scientific instrumentation. At this point, it's pretty interesting study. So bioenergy fields in and around our body. Now, the last level that we need to clear on is the physical level. And the physical level can overlap with the energetic level a bit, and the mental and emotional levels as well. And the physical level is really our physical body. So this could be our musculature, our fascia, it could be our bones. I mean, literally any part of the physical body, our nervous system is encompassed here. So a lot of times when we will have a belief, a limiting belief or a limiting emotional pattern, we'll start to get physical effects in our body as a result of this. This happens, but through the mind-body connection. And if you're interested in this subject, I highly recommend you check out the field called psychoneuroimmunology. There we go. It's a mouthful. And this is the study of the mind-body connection. And what we see is that if we have something that's held as a limiting belief or a negative emotional pattern over time, there's going to be some corresponding effect in the body, because how we feel and what we perceive affects this cascade of hormones and neurotransmitters that come out of our body, which come out of our brain and our nervous system, which start to affect our digestive tract, and they start to affect how our body functions over time. So we can get seized muscles, tight muscles, and so on and so forth. And these are oftentimes limiting beliefs and emotional patterns that are stored in our physical body. Now, it also goes the other way too. If we have some intense physical trauma, like if we get attacked, right? If we're walking down the street and we get robbed, let's say you're in New York City or something, and you're walking down an alley and all of a sudden some guy pops out with a knife and starts robbing you. Okay, you may not have had any limiting beliefs or emotional patterns associated with that alley previously, but because someone jumped out and did that, all of a sudden you feel fear in association with that circumstance, or being in a big city, or being by yourself, right? So your emotions, your emotional experience of a given moment can input limiting beliefs into your system as well, okay? And that might also cause an intense physical reaction where you freeze, right? And then that can create a physical response in the body that persists after the experience, and the trauma gets locked in there. On another level too, you could have negative influences in your mind and in your emotional body as well from different energetic fields that you can be in. I just saw an article this morning that researchers at this university are using magnets on people's brains to basically get them to feel differently about their perception of God. So they're basically able to induce spirituality by putting magnets on parts of people's brains. Okay, so when we walk around, we're in powerful electromagnetic fields. The earth generates a powerful electromagnetic field. There's electromagnetic fields from Wi-Fi, from our cell phones, from the lights that are here. So all of those are also affecting us as well. And so it's important to just be aware of that and to maybe optimize your environment to support your healing in that wavelength. But anyways, all of that to say that all of those can feed back into the mental and emotional level as well. So it's not only our mind and our emotional bodies that are creating our reality is also influencing us back in. Our external experiences are influencing us back in. So those are the four levels that we need to clear on: mental, emotional, physical, and energetic, right? So I'm gonna talk about the dimensions in a second here, but it's important that at each dimension that I talk about, that you're actually working on all these 4 levels as you go down deeper and deeper and deeper into these 5 dimensions of healing. Because what I see happening, and what we see happening in our at our institute, the Flow Consciousness Institute, often is that people are only working at one level. You know, they might be using NLP, great framework, great body of work, great philosophy, great tools, but a lot of times it's only working on the level of the mind. And so people are only healing on one level. And so they get incomplete healings, and then what either happens is the pattern resurfaces, or their reality doesn't shift as much as they had hoped it would from making that shift, because they haven't cleared on the emotional, energetic, or physical yet. Or some people will do really effective psychotherapy and work really powerfully on an emotional level. They use different tools to work on an emotional level. There's plenty of healing techniques that do that. And maybe they'll work on the mind a little bit, but they don't work on the physical body, or they don't work on the energetic level. Or then you have all these energy healing modalities that are fantastic, that work super well on the energetic level, but they don't always carry over into the other areas. And then, of course, the final frontier, the somatic, the physical, you get a lot of people that just neglect that completely, or that only work on the physical, only work on the somatic, and don't carry it over into the other areas. So in order to get an effective healing on any issue that you're dealing with, you want to work on these 4 levels. And this is where we spent a lot of time and energy and money and research and all that stuff at the Institute, because we figured that if we could figure out ways to do rapid healings on all these 4 levels with really simple tools, then we can greatly increase the speed at which people can transform, shift their consciousness, shift their reality, get into flow, and basically do whatever they want, create a reality that's really amazing and abundant and fulfilling to them. So you want to work on all these 4 levels, and you want to work on all these 5 dimensions. Now the 5 dimensions, this is a lifelong practice to some degree. It doesn't have to take your entire life, but it is a longer term process because of the nature of the unconscious and the nuances of what's involved there. Okay. But basically, the 5 dimensions of healing, so I'll name them and then we'll talk about each of them, are this life, pre-birth, ancestral, past life, and the level of the soul. Okay, so this life, pre-life, ancestral, past life, and the level of the soul. And the way I listed them is really paying homage to the depth that they go. Okay, so the deeper you go, the murkier things become, because you're going deeper and deeper and deeper into the unconscious mind and kind of multidimensional aspects of yourself. And so that space is not as well understood at this time, and it requires a little bit more nuance and self-mastery to go there. But let's talk about the first level. Okay, the first level is this life. So when we're talking about healing in this life, we're talking about healing things that or limiting beliefs and negative emotional states in particular, okay, that you picked up in this life. All right, so that means that these are things that could have been learned culturally, that you could have been imprinted from your parents or your family, things you could have learned at school, or things that could have happened to you from just any kind of experience that you had in this lifetime. So from birth to now, that encompasses this life, that dimension of healing, right? And this is usually the easiest area of healing for people to access, because oftentimes we remember what happened to us, or if we don't remember it at the tip of our tongue, through a little bit of meditation and mindful awareness, we can go into that area and discover these things that we picked up there and work with that. So things are kind of on the surface, more so on the surface than they are on some of the other levels, and it's a lot easier to work with. And there's a lot of shit that we pick up, quite frankly, in this lifetime alone. So healing on the level of this life is really important. This is the first level that's most easy to access and usually where most people start. And you can get a lot of lift from working on this level. I would say up to 50 or 60% of the limiting beliefs and the emotional patterns that we carry are from this lifetime. So you can make a lot of progress working here. And it's easier to map. We share a lot of similar limiting beliefs and emotions with other people. There's a lot that are inherited through our culture. So it's pretty easy to work on this level. And this is where most healing modalities work. And so most of the things that you'll do, on the personal development healing wavelength will be working on the level of this life. And they'll take you pretty far, but only up to a certain point, because after that, you have to start going into the pre-life realm. Okay, so this is the second dimension of healing, is pre-life. And what do I mean by that? So pre-life is basically everything from conception to birth. So, or excuse me, pre-birth is the name of this dimension of healing. So it's everything from conception, the moment of conception, to the moment of your birth, right? And this is dealing with all of the things that we pick up through the experiences of our mothers, right? Ostensibly through that phase of our life. We oftentimes neglect this and we think, oh, well, that's pre-birth. We were, unconscious. We were not there. But that's not actually the case. And we are epigenetically inheriting trauma and experiences that are non-traumatic experiences through our mother's experiences. So our mother has an experience, maybe she's really stressed out one day, so her body releases a cascade of stress hormones. Well, those stress hormones will make their way into the fetus. They'll make their way into you as a child at whatever stage of development is, and they can have effects on your physiology. Also, we inherit a lot of our emotional patterns and limiting beliefs epigenetically, and we'll talk more about this in the next dimension of healing that we're going to talk about. But we inherit a lot of these things epigenetically, and so what happens when we're pre-birth is that if our mother has a consistent, there's something she's consistently stressed out about at that moment, or if she has some kind of traumatic experience, that will change her genes, which change how her body functions, which will start to change our genes as they're developing and how our body functions, even as a fetus, right, in the womb. Okay, so we're not blank slates when we come in. We're actually already being imprinted by the experiences and the circumstances that our mother has while we are in the womb pre-birth, right? So that's the second dimension of healing. So once people go back to, once they get to pretty deep levels in this life, the first dimension of healing, oftentimes they'll start to go back into the womb, either through a deep hypnotic regression, or sometimes they'll just naturally start to remember those things, or using different intuitional capacities that we have, we can start to go into the pre-birth timelines and start to work there as well, and start to let go of things that we weren't previously aware of that we were carrying from that aspect and that time in our life. Okay, and I want to just share a quick note on awareness here. Awareness is really the name of the game. That's why I'm talking about these 5 dimensions of healing, because the more awareness you have of these different levels, the deeper you'll be able to go. And what we don't have awareness of ends up controlling us. Okay, what we don't have awareness of ends up controlling us. So if you only work on the level of this life and you don't have awareness, or you haven't worked on the level, on the dimension of these other 4 layers, then what happens is that you don't work with those beliefs. You don't work on the beliefs that are there, the limiting beliefs that are there. You don't work on the emotional patterns that are there, and then they end up continuing to control your reality unconsciously. And so you may hit this income ceiling in your life, in your career, or in your business or whatever, and you just can't, for the life of you, figure out why you can't get past it. Or you have this super irrational fear of being in public, or a fear of failure, and it doesn't make sense, right? Maybe you've had a lot of success in your life and you just don't have a fear. There's no conscious reason that you have a fear of failure, but that's because you're only looking at the level, of the dimension of this life. But when you get into past life, or ancestral, or the level of the soul, or the level of pre-birth, you might notice that there is a really strong fear of failure there, or there is really strong irrational fear about something that is controlling your life in some way, shape, or form, right? That you may have inherited from an ancestor or something like that. So once you have that awareness, then you can go in there and work with it. Otherwise, it's just going to continue to perplex you, and you'll be subject to it, and it'll affect your life. So we've talked about first dimension of healing, which is this life. We've talked a little bit about the second dimension of healing, which is pre-birth. Now we're going to talk about the third dimension of healing, which is the ancestral level. Okay, and again, you don't come into this life as a blank slate. You come in innocent, but you don't come in as a blank slate, because we actually inherit limiting beliefs and positive beliefs too, but we inherit limiting beliefs and negative emotional patterns from our ancestors, right? How does this happen? Well, all of our experiences that we have in a given lifetime, they epigenetically affect our DNA. So the essence of epigenetics is that our experiences, our thoughts, our environment affects the actions that we take, the lifestyle habits that we have affects our DNA. It makes changes in our DNA. It causes methylation in our DNA or demethylation in our DNA that tightens it and winds it up and creates issues, or unwinds it and makes it easier to replicate. But anyways, getting too far into the science there. But basically, our experiences cause changes in our DNA. The same is true for our ancestors, right? So, your parents, for example, have had all kinds of experiences in their life that affected their DNA. And then when you're in the womb and, you're being created, how do you get created? Well, the egg and the sperm join, and then those cells start to replicate and produce you. So they combine and they start to produce you. So your original blueprint is your parents' genetics, which is a record of all of the experiences that they've had. And then if you trace that back, then their genetics were imprinted from their parents, which, their parents' genetics imprinted all of the experiences that they have. So this keeps going back and back and back and back, right? So what happens is that you basically are inheriting limiting beliefs, negative emotional patterns, and trauma from many, many, many generations back. If someone that is in your lineage hasn't healed that, then it's going to continue to pass on into your genes. So I've been doing a lot of healing work lately, and I keep coming back to these different layers of things that are not related to any experiences that I've had in my lifetime, where I'm carrying different fears and limiting beliefs that make no sense in the context of my life, but they make a ton of sense in the context of what my ancestors experienced. Some of them being from Argentina and growing up, at a time in that country which was really scary, and there was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of political unrest and a lot of weird stuff happening on a governmental level that created a lot of fear in everybody. A really tough economic situation. It was persecution of my culture in different lineages of my ancestors. So they were living in hostile cultures that were I'm sure doing all kinds of horrible things to them that they probably didn't have healing tools to deal with. So even though it doesn't make sense in the context of my life now, I'm carrying things from 3, 5, 7, 10 generations ago that were traumatic in my genetics. So as I'm doing this healing work and I'm starting to work on the dimension more and more of the level of ancestral healing, I'm finding all of these things that I'm like, oh my God, like no wonder I have this irrational fear of this, because I could intuitively go back and re-experience what happened to my father or to my mother or to my grandmother or to my great-grandmother or whatever. And a really cool hack on this level is to look at the obvious limiting beliefs and patterns of your parents and your grandparents and your family. Because if it's in your family, especially your nuclear family, the chances that you've inherited it are extremely high, extremely high. So it's a really easy win to just kind of look behind you ancestrally, look back behind you, look at your parents, look at your sisters, your siblings, your brother if you have them, brothers and sisters if you have them, your grandparents and so on, and notice any of their dysfunctions, because if you're in a direct genetic lineage from them, you probably have it as well. So this is a really cool way to work. And it can also help demystify that area. So if you're starting to go and work on these levels for the first time, it may seem kind of mystical. But if you can connect the dots back to a pattern that one of your parents has, then it can help illuminate that trail of limiting beliefs and emotions that connect back into your life experience now, right? So this is the third dimension of healing, the level of ancestry, and a really, really important one to work at, especially if you've put in a lot of time and energy already on some of these other levels, then this is the next frontier in your healing journey, okay? Going one level deeper from the level of ancestry is the level of past lives. And this is where it starts to get pretty multidimensional and pretty interesting. And the idea of past lives, the idea of us reincarnating can be a little controversial, and some people that really haven't dove deeply into the research might even doubt that it's happening, but I can assure you that it is happening. And the cutting edge of science is not, I mean, not only is there frameworks to explain how it happens on a quantum level, but there's been some really fascinating research done by Professor Ian Stevenson of the University of Virginia. He's an incredible guy who was a pioneering researcher into the phenomenon of reincarnation. And he documented thousands of cases of reincarnation all over the world, during the time when he was alive on the planet. And, there's some fascinating stories of little children in really remote parts of the world who would be born with these insane irrational fears about things and memories of things that never actually happened to them in that life. And they would communicate them to their parents, and their parents were just perplexed. And then this would go on for years and years and years, where the kids couldn't eat certain foods or were deathly afraid of water, and they couldn't take showers or baths, and the parents were pulling their hair out. And so they started going to psychologists and trying to figure out what was going on. And they were telling the psychologists these stories. And some of those psychologists knew about Professor Ian Stevenson, and they're like, you got to contact Ian Stevenson and tell him what's going on. And sure enough, he would come there to document the case. And what would happen is when he got involved, they would start to look up newspaper clippings, and they would start to go into the historical archives and try and find records of what these kids were remembering and were saying to verify if it was actually true. And in very many of these cases, what they would find is, for example, there was one story of a little girl, I think it was in Thailand or something, and she was deathly afraid of water. And she had these memories of drowning, although she never drowned, obviously, because she was still alive in that life. And so she started to tell her parents, and she told Ian Stevenson this story. And then they went out and started doing the historical research and actually found that many years before she was born, a little girl that had the same name that this other little girl remembered had actually fallen into a ditch and drowned, and it was recorded in the newspaper. And this little girl, that little girl who died, her consciousness reincarnated into another little girl in Thailand who was having all the memories and this irrational fear of water, which made sense in the context of the past life that she had experienced. And they were able to, this little girl that was having all these traumatic memories of the past life actually remembered her name. She remembered all these details about that girl that they were later able to verify with, historical proven newspaper clippings that showed that she actually, that same consciousness had actually pulled over into this lifetime, or that lifetime for the girl. And also a lot of people that have out-of-body experiences or have near-death experiences, their consciousness, even after their physical body completely dies, their consciousness survives and is able to see things that are happening in the emergency room, and all these different things that they couldn't possibly see with being fully brain dead and being, having their hearts fully stopped. And they're able to see and remember all these things. And if they're resuscitated and when they come back into their body, they're able to report on all the things that happened, with crystal clear clarity while they were dead, while they were clinically dead. So there's a lot of great research to show, and there's some great books. I would recommend checking out Ervin Laszlo's work if you're interested in this. It's a great starting point. It'll send you down all kinds of rabbit holes to find out more about this kind of stuff. But basically, there's all kinds of evidence to show that our consciousness absolutely survives after we physically die. And not only that, but it retains the memory of what happened to us while we were alive in our physical bodies in a given lifetime. And it even remembers what's happening in between lifetimes as well. So this all to say that we are carrying deep within our unconscious memories of past lifetimes, okay? And these can have effects on us now, not just memories, but we're carrying limiting beliefs and negative emotional patterns from past lifetimes, right? So these carry over with us from lifetime to lifetime. If we haven't healed them and let them go and essentially erase them from our consciousness or released whatever traumatic memory was there, then they end up following us from lifetime to lifetime. And so again, if you've got really deep irrational fears or things that don't make sense or patterns that you've been working on to heal and clear and they just keep coming back over and over again, a lot of times the reason that is because there's deeper limiting beliefs and deeper emotional patterns that are anchoring those in place that only make sense in the context of a past life. And if you don't have the awareness that you can carry these limiting beliefs and emotional patterns over from a past life, and you don't have the wherewithal to even start looking there, then what ends up happening is that you neglect it. You don't have the awareness like we talked about before. And so you end up just repeating those patterns and their cycles over and over again. But once you're able to see back into that experience and recognize the limiting beliefs that may have been picked up there, recognize the negative emotional patterns that may have been picked up in a past life, and connect them back to this life, then you're able to let those go. You can use effective healing techniques that work on all these 4 levels that we talked about earlier to also work on something that you picked up in a past life and start to let that go. And this is where we started at the very beginning of the live, because I was talking about how I was clearing a fear that I had picked up approximately 300,000 years ago in linear time, in historical time. And it was something, it stemmed because I was working on this in this lifetime. I was working on something that kept coming up, which was this fear of being wrong. And I had worked on it on all the 4 levels, and it kept persisting. And I was really getting perplexed by it. And then doing some deep healing work and really kind of probing the unconscious and using my intuitive faculties to kind of examine this multidimensional aspect of my own history, I connected it back to a really traumatic life that I had experienced 300,000 years ago. And what I realized is I was trying to clear the fear of being wrong, but it wasn't actually the fear of being wrong that was the problem. I had made a mistake in that lifetime. I had taken an action in that lifetime which resulted in me dying traumatically. So I essentially made a wrong move in that life, right? You can't, on some level, on a non-dual level, there's no such thing as a wrong move. But for practical purposes, I did something, I made a choice that resulted in me dying traumatically in that lifetime. Okay, so it's easy to see how the mind would interpret that as saying you made a wrong move or you made a mistake, right? And you could see why a fear like the fear of being wrong would be embedded so deeply, because if you made a wrong move in a past life and you died in a super traumatic way, well, obviously you're going to have a fear of making a wrong move, but that might extend out into your business in ways that don't make sense, right? Because you know that you have a strategy that works, but you're still afraid of it going wrong, and so you don't execute on that strategy, and you're confused by it. Well, it could be because you got traumatically killed in a past lifetime. All right. And so what was below the fear of being wrong was the fear of my soul getting trapped. And what was below that, even further still, was a fear of losing my freedom, right? So my fear of being wrong was the result of a traumatic death 300,000 years ago, which was anchored in even further by the fear of my soul getting trapped, given the nature of what I experienced that caused that traumatic death. And then that was anchored in further by the fear of losing freedom, which is like an inherent property of reality. And so to lose that is this kind of existential black hole, which makes you feel like you're going to evaporate into nothingness. And that's a pretty deep thought. But so anyways, all of that to say that, and working on those levels, I realized I had the awareness that there was something that was deeper than just the fear of being wrong. And that's why that was stuck. It was because I wasn't working on these deeper fears as well. And when I started to release on those deeper fears, on those level of those deeper fears, then the fear of being wrong went away, and it released finally. Something that I had carried with me my entire life, right? And probably many, many lifetimes, given how it originated. So it's really important to work on the level of our past lives, because a lot of the limiting beliefs and the fears that we're creating originate from that period. Okay, so that's the 4th dimension of healing, is the level of the past life. And the 5th and deepest dimension of healing is the level of the soul. Okay, and in shamanic sense, this is often called soul retrieval work, but I prefer the term soul defragmentation, and I'll explain why. Because it's paints a little bit fuller picture of the dynamics of what's going on at the soul level. But there's an interesting point to make here at the level of the soul to kind of understand the dynamics of how healing at this level works. And that is, we talked about past lives, and I talk about past lives. I use that term because that's how it's used in common, in the common culture, right? We talk about past lives because we perceive time as linear, but time isn't actually linear. Time is a factor of our perception of movement, actually, our perception of distance or perception of change, right? Then we add in this time level where we think change is happening. We think time is moving because change is happening, or we're moving in an XY sense through our reality, right? And so it gives us this perception that there's something before, yet to come and happening right now, which gives us a perception of time. But the truth is that there's only a now, an ever-present, persistent now moment. Time is actually an illusion as we know it. And so with that being said, there's not actually such thing as past lives. There's such thing as simultaneous lives, okay? So there's simultaneous lives, right? And this is where the level of the soul becomes important, because basically what that means then at a soul level is that we don't just have one incarnation going at a time. We have multiple incarnations going at the same time, right? So when I said that I cleared something 300,000 years ago, yes, from the perspective of linear time, it was happening in a different era, but that lifetime to some degree it was coexisting simultaneously with this now moment. And if you guys have ever seen the movie, what's it called? It's the one by Christopher Nolan. Maybe someone can help me out in the comments here. Interstellar, right? There's a really, really incredible depiction of what I'm talking about, the simultaneity of time in the movie Interstellar when he goes into the black hole towards the end of the movie. And he's basically in present time, he's interacting with the bookshelf, and he's trying to get a hold of his daughter through the bookshelf. I think it is his daughter or son or something. And he's shaking the bookshelf, and it's all happening at the same time, even though in the perceptual level, it's happening at different time frames, right? This is how it works on the level of the souls. Everything is happening at the same time. So we have multiple incarnations all going on at the same time, right? And so there's a point I wanted to make about this. So when we're doing healing at the soul level, what can happen is that we can have a traumatic lifetime that's going on in parallel to our lifetime right now, okay? We can have a traumatic lifetime in another lifetime that's going on in parallel to our lifetime right now, that's feeding over into this lifetime, okay? And so those traumatic lifetimes in shamanic terms are usually referred to as soul fragments, right? And these are lifetimes where you can have cycles of trauma repeating over and over again, because in that incarnation, in that part of your unconscious in your mind, okay, there's a limiting belief and emotional pattern that are perpetuating that cycle of trauma in continual lifetime loops, okay? And if you don't heal those, then what ends up happening is that even though you may have it together in this life and things may be going pretty well for you, there can be some bleed over from that simultaneous life, because it's still one soul that all of these lifetimes are emerging from, right? It's still one pool of the greater subconscious, the greater unconscious, as Jung talks about. There's still one pool that is pulling, that your consciousness now in this life is pulling from, that's connected to all these other different lifetimes that are all held together in one bunch by the soul itself, right? So when you work at the level of the soul, you're going past the level of your individual personhood and moving into that level of your own individual collective consciousness and working there. You're defragmenting other parts of your soul. And that becomes a really important layer, at a given point in your healing journey. And also just at any point too, if you're interested in going all the way, because you might track a limiting belief or a fear like I did from this life into a past life, into the level of the soul, because I was having trauma at the level of the soul in that past life that I just described. And so it became important for me to work at that level, because the fear of being wrong is a really deep fear that pervades everything and affects all of your behavior. And so letting that go is really important. And if to let that go fully, I need to go into the level of the soul, it's important to have the awareness of that level and to have, it's important to have the awareness of that dimension and have tools to work at that dimension as well. So there's some great tools in the shamanic space. Soul retrieval work is really effective for working here. That's not the only way to do it, but that's a good place to start if you're curious. This is something we teach in greater depth in our level 2 flow trainings. So we go into the dynamics of healing at the level of ancestry, past life, and soul, because it starts to become important in your journey into flow after you've gotten a lot of things cleared from this lifetime that you're in. So if you're interested in that, there's some information on our website about that level of our training and what we do there. But it's really important to work at the level of the soul. Okay, the last dimension that we want to work at. It's extremely, extremely important. And when you start to work, like I said, bring it back around to where we started, when you start to work on all of these 5 different dimensions, that's what's going to fully free you up to be in your full potential, right? These concepts of full potential get thrown around, of limitless potential, of superhuman capacity, of superhuman consciousness, of enlightenment, these things, right? These concepts that, a lot of people, especially in the community around flow and in my networks, a lot of people are fascinated by this stuff, right? It's becoming important for humanity. We've had so many aspects of Maslow's hierarchy taken care of in many parts of the world that at this point we're starting to become really interested in self-actualization. So these things that were once really esoteric and in the domain of mystery schools are now becoming really important to our growth as a species, our growth as a collective, right? Without this self-actualization layer, without doing healing on these 5 different dimensions and on these 4 different levels, okay, we're still playing out trauma patterns individually and collectively as a species, and that makes it really hard for us to stop being at war and to have peace at the level of the planet and to really distribute resources fairly, right? Why aren't resources distributed fairly? Because people have deep fears about being insecure, so they hoard wealth and they hoard resources, right? And it all gets collected at the top and it's not being shared properly. Or they have lusts for power because they don't have these deeper, traumas that are driving those lusts for power and control over their reality. They're not able to trust and surrender. That was the last thing I'm going to talk about on the soul level. I just reminded myself. They don't have the ability to trust and surrender. And so they feel like they need to control everything, and that extends to everybody. So they get into positions of power in the government, sociopathically try and control everything else, right? So this level of healing on all these different levels connects back to everything that we experience, both in terms of our personal realities and our personal success and thrivability, and in terms of the collective reality. So important. And like I said, I reminded myself about the last area of the soul dimension, soul level of healing, that dimension that I want to talk about. And that was the ability to trust your soul, right? If you haven't healed at the level of the soul, right? If you haven't healed the limiting beliefs, the emotional patterns that are residing there, it makes it really difficult. And if you haven't healed on all these other different levels as well, it makes it really difficult to trust yourself, to trust your intuition, to trust the nudges that are coming from your soul, right? It makes it difficult to exist in that space. And if we can't exist in that space of trust, then we're always going to have a certain layer of feeling separate from reality. We're always going to have a certain layer of fear that's present. And when we cross that bridge of trust fully, that's what really allows us to emerge into the first level of what I would call true enlightenment. True enlightenment. We're fully trusting, we're fully emerging into that space of unconditional love, right? Cosmic consciousness. That first major step into it is really mediated by our ability to trust, because otherwise there's this deep existential separation from unity that's present in our consciousness, from oneness that's present in our consciousness, because we don't fully trust on some level everyone else, the rest of reality, life itself, whatever. So there's this fundamental divide that separates us. And in order to cross that fully, we need to go and work on all the 5 dimensions. We need to go and work on all the 4 different levels. And we need to heal limiting beliefs, negative emotional states, and trauma on all of these different planes. So it's a lot. I know this is a lot, right? We covered a ton of ground here and mapped out this really kind of multidimensional map of consciousness and healing and reality. But again, just being aware of it starts to make it doable. Just being aware of it starts to help you see the different areas that you may not have worked on yet, and allows you to go deeper faster. And it's totally possible to cross all those bridges that I just described in one lifetime. It's totally possible to do that. It's a tall order perhaps, but it's totally possible. And because your consciousness survives from lifetime to lifetime, the more progress you make in this life, then the more it's going to help you on all these other different levels as well. And so when you start again in your next life, or when you start again in a simultaneous life, right? If you're looking at it from the perspective of the soul, it's helping you rise on all those different levels, and you're going to, make more progress, and you're going to have less suffering in those other lifetimes and any subsequent lifetimes that you have. More flow, more joy, more impact, all the things that we crave now. We have to take a long-term view here. We have to set ourselves up for further lifetimes after this. So I think I'm going to wrap it up here. For more information on this wavelength, go to our website, flowconsciousnessinstitute.com. This is what we're passionate about. This is what we talk about all the time. There's tons of free resources for you guys to wet your whistle there. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining me. All right, guys, take care.